Greetings, my wonderful students. Today we discuss electing the president. What you see before you is a map of the 2008 presidential election results. Red states voted Republican, blue states voted Democrat. And we're going to be discussing the Electoral College systems. You see down here it says the Electoral College. John McCain won 173 electoral votes, and Barack Obama won 365 electoral votes. And 270 votes are required to win the election. So President Obama easily won election in 2008. Now, the original system of the Electoral College was created by the Constitution. Each state had a number of electors in the Electoral College equal to their number of representatives and senators. So the minimum number of electoral votes a state could have was 3, because every state has 2 senators, and every state has at least 1 representative in the House. There was no popular vote at all in the original system. Everything was done by the states. The state chose who their electors would be in the Electoral College. Now, candidates with the most electoral votes would become president, and the person with the second most electoral votes would become vice president. Ties for president and vice president would be decided in the House of Representatives. So this system would have made it that with a modern political party system, you would have a Republican president and a Democratic vice president, or a Democratic president and a Republican vice president. So that was going to be changed. Washington was the only president who was elected unanimously in the Electoral College. Now, by 1800, political parties had formed, and each party nominated candidates, such as Thomas Jefferson here and John Adams, and electors for every state. So there was a set of Democratic Republican electors, and there was a set of Federalist electors in New York and in Vermont and in New Hampshire, and so on and so forth. Now, if the electors of a party were chosen, then those electors would vote for their party's presidential candidate. So what would happen is this: if New York voted in favor of Democratic Republicans, then all the electors for New York State would be Democratic Republican candidates. And obviously, the Democratic Republican electors would vote for their own candidate, the Democratic Republican in this case, Thomas Jefferson. However, if, say, Vermont chose Federalist electors over the Democratic Republican electors, then those electors would support, of course, a Federalist candidate. I recognize this can be a confusing topic, so feel free to email me and I can help explain a little better. Now, the Democratic Republicans won a majority, so they cast their votes in the Electoral College for Jefferson and Burr. They're candidates for president and vice president. They didn't want Thomas Jefferson to be president and John Adams to be vice president. They wanted to have both the presidency and the vice presidency. So when they cast their votes, Jefferson and Burr were tied. So it was unsure which one was going to become president and which one was going to become vice president. The tie went to the House of Representatives, and Thomas Jefferson became the President of the United States. Because of this issue, they created the 12th Amendment, and it solved the problem by making the electors cast one set of ballots for the president and a different set of ballots for the vice president, separate ballots for the 2 offices. And that's how we do it today. By the 1820s, states had begun placing presidential candidates on ballots for the citizens to choose, which is the system we have today, where we vote in a presidential election, and what we're voting for is the electors for our state. So if you vote Democrat, you're voting for the Democratic electors for New York State. And if you vote Republican, you're voting for the Republican electors for New York State. And then when the Electoral College meets to cast their vote, whichever group won in New York State will represent New York in the Electoral College. Now, the system today, parties choose their candidates in late summer. So in an election year such as 2016 or 2020, what you'll see is the electors will choose their candidates. There will be a Republican candidate by August, and there will be a Democratic candidate by August, sometime before the end of the month. We will cast our ballots in November to decide which person we want to be president, of course. We are going to vote for our party's electors, as I already stated. And now, the electors are not required to vote for their party, but they usually do. So, for example, did you see here in the 2008 elections that the Democrats won New York? So, all of the New York's electoral votes would vote Democrat. But they don't have to. If one of them decided they wanted to vote for a third party or vote for somebody completely different, then they could, and there's really nothing that can be done about it. And those people who vote for people, those electors who vote for someone who's not their party, are called faithless electors. They've never actually changed the outcome of an election. Most of the time, if you see someone who's doing a faithless elector, they are, in fact, making a protest vote after the election's already been decided. There are 538 total electoral votes, and a candidate needs 270 to be elected president. 270 is more than half of 538, so that makes sense. Issues with the Electoral College. After close elections, there is usually call for a reform to the Electoral College system. 3 weaknesses of the Electoral College system are usually pointed out. The first one is winner take all. A candidate that wins the popular vote in a state wins all of that state's electoral votes. So, if 51% of New York State votes Democrat and 49% vote Republican, all of New York State's electoral votes go to the Democrats. And vice versa. If 51% of the state voted Republican and 49% voted for Democrat, then all of the state's electoral votes would go Republican. So this creates a system where the people in a state that's closely divided feel like they've been disenfranchised. This is also what makes it possible for a president to lose the popular vote but win the electoral vote. This has happened 5 times now in all of U.S. history. Third-party candidates. A strong third party can prevent either major party from receiving the number of electoral votes needed to win. A third party could, it's not happened, but could then bargain to release electoral votes to one of the 2 major party candidates. I should correct myself. That's not happened in modern times. If you recall, well, we'll get to that in a minute. If no candidate, of course, gets enough votes, then the election is decided by the House of Representatives. The pictures I have here are 2 third-party candidates who affected the election for President of the United States. Up here is Ralph Nader, whose influence in the 2000 election probably cost Democrat Al Gore the election and allowed George W. Bush to win the presidency. And this is Ross Perot, who ran on a third-party ticket in 1992, and his campaign probably cost George H.W. Bush the 1992 election, giving the presidency to Bill Clinton. Here is where we're going to talk about this. On the left is John Adams, and on the right is Andrew Jackson. Now, in that particular election, you might remember from your American history, there were more than 2 candidates. I believe there were 4 at the time. And as a result, no presidential candidate received a majority of electoral votes. Therefore, none of them could be president. You have to have more than half of the electoral votes. It doesn't matter that Andrew Jackson had more electoral votes than John Quincy Adams. So what happened was Adams and the Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, made a deal, and Clay ended up getting Adams the vote, not in the Electoral College, but in the House of Representatives. So John Quincy Adams became president, and he then named Clay as his Secretary of State. So if the election goes to the House, each state gets 1 vote. And if the majority of representatives can't agree on a candidate, the state loses its vote. A candidate, of course, today would need 26 or more votes to win this way. Now, the issue with John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson's election is it shows how having more than 2 parties in the system disadvantages the political party with the most votes because it splits the vote in a number of ways. This is one of the reasons why, even though some countries have multiple political parties that vote for prime minister, we keep ending up with just 2 major political parties, and it's because of the way the Electoral College system works. Ideas for reform. Now, one idea to reform the presidential election system is to choose electors from each district. For example, we vote for individuals to represent us in Congress. Those are congressional districts. Now, because each state has a number of electors equal to the number of people in Congress, where there would be an electoral vote for each district of each state. And then there would be 2 more electoral votes that would represent the state senators in the U.S. Senate. So if we choose electors from each district, then you might vote for a specific district candidate. So, for example, someone in our district could vote for Trump, and someone in another district in New York State could vote for Joe Biden. Now, in a case like that, then one electoral vote would be given to Trump for the electoral district he won, and then one would be given to Biden. It gets rid of the winner-take-all system. And then the last 2 electoral votes that represent statewide would be given to the candidate who won the most districts in a state. Again, sounds a little confusing, but if you think about it, it makes sense. Another possible reform would be for a candidate to win a percentage of the electoral votes in the state equal to the percentage of the popular vote in a state. So if you won 51% of the vote of the state, you would get 51% of the electoral votes. That would be a little bit more difficult to do, especially in states that only have 3 electoral votes, and some of them only have 3. Now, critics say that either of these systems would be too complicated and would force more elections into the House of Representatives. The system as it works today, yes, sometimes a person can lose the popular vote and win the electoral vote, but it's only happened 5 times in history. Direct popular election. Now, the most obvious idea is to get rid of the Electoral College entirely and elect the president and vice president directly. Critics say this would undermine federalism because the states would lose influence. It would no longer belong to the states in choosing the president. And as a result, smaller states and states with less people would effectively be always outvoted by larger states. So larger states such as New York and California would pretty much definitely be able to choose the president. And those smaller states in the Midwest, they would have little to no voice at all in the presidential election. Critics also state the candidates would just concentrate efforts in densely populated areas, mainly cities, leaving rural areas outside. The inauguration. Now, the inauguration is the oath of office, and the president takes office at noon on January 20th of the year following the election. So, in the election of 2016 ended, and then the president took office January 20th, 2017, after the election. And January 2021 is when a president will take the oath of office following the 2020 election. The president takes the oath of office, the inauguration, and then makes an address, a speech called the inaugural address. And I hope you enjoyed this particular video.